EricHunley has the whole monopoly. I don't know who that son of a bitch thinks he is.
Welcome to Laid Back Law with your favorite lawyers from around the interwebs.
No. Piers Morgan is doing the hide my boner lean. That's what he's doing. Look at him.
I think this is actually the first time that a billionaire cut safety standards, and it was the billionaire themselves that died.
And that's what made Polieres. I don't even know how to pronounce this guy's name.
Polieres.
I'm board certified criminal trial law in Florida. I'm your man. Of course, you have to compensate me.
Discussing the most pressing of topics every Friday at noon Eastern Time.
I did this way before him. I had the big brain panel before EricHunley even existed.
Nice. All right. Welcome to the channel. And folks, you might notice that there's a little bit of a change. This is now no longer Laid Back News. It is now Laid Back Law. Why is that? Well, essentially, all I have been doing on Laid Back News was a legal panel that happens every week at Friday on noon, or clips from said legal panel. So my thought was, why am I calling it Laid Back News when really it's Laid Back Law? It's a new name. We're locking it down. Hopefully it is more in line with everybody's expectations who are watching this. So if you like the Friday panel, this is the channel for you, Laid Back Law. And I hope you consider subscribing. So to actually get into the Laid Back Law, we're going to talk about right now streaming trials on YouTube, because that's a very important function for folks like Dave up there at Making Law Simple, Jeff at Legal Vices, and Dave is going through some of the routine, again, like many people do. How do we stream a trial? I believe you're going to be streaming the Ethan Crumley trial.
Not Ethan,
parents.
the parents, James and Jennifer Crumley. Yeah, it starts on the 23rd with jury selection. And I have been, this is local court that the county in which I reside. So I've been talking to them every time I'm in there and making sure that I can get my cameras in. And they last week just denied me my cameras in there and said they're going to have one media pooled source. Okay. So they did a random drawing, and a local ABC affiliate apparently gets the cameras in the courtroom. But they just issued an order which says the local ABC affiliate can share their pool feed with the local NBC, with the local, a couple other local channels, and then send it to their networks. And all other media sources can access it through Zoom. So now I don't have the local ABC affiliate who I was supposed to, or I was working with to get the pool coverage. Basically said, nope, you're going to have to contact CNN if you want to get access to that. So hopefully you know somebody over there. Otherwise, I can show you how to get on the Zoom feed. And so that's what I've been dealing with. And so it doesn't look like the court's order is fairly lengthy, and it's kind of weirdly worded, but it seems like there's no right to public access that media pool, or there's no right to other affiliates. There's like four affiliates, local affiliates, that can have access to this, and nobody else can. And it's a bit odd to me that the court can do this. And I haven't challenged them yet on it. I'm thinking about it. But in the meantime, I'm trying to test and prepare everything else for doing the Zoom feed and everything else. But it's just a little disheartening, and it's very frustrating dealing with it on that end. But yeah, so that's what's going on. And apparently other people are dealing with the same issue with other cases. And it's disheartening that the bigger media sources that can, quote, cooperate and share their pool feed won't allow other media sources to have access to it.
Now, Ian, you've dealt with a lot of internal YouTube, things like that, or whatever. What is the legality of this? It doesn't seem quite right that a public trial, which supposedly is open for everybody to go, walk in, whatever, space, obviously considering that you could say, oh, only this outlet is getting that. And I know a lot of people really struggle with, what is it? They call it law and crime
yeah.
or other channels. What do you think? And you're muted.
Well, listen, I was going to say, can you say that word on the stream? But Anyway, definitely the First Amendment and other laws that apply state by state allow public access to these trials, unless there's a reason the judge thinks that there shouldn't be. However, my understanding is that doesn't guarantee access to certain feeds. There is a administrative function of a judge in a court to be able to say, listen, I'm going to allow public access, but I'm not going to just allow it to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And these days, criticism of anybody out there. There's a lot of people who want to stream a lot of things because it gets a lot of views. So I'm not arguing that there shouldn't be access to this thing. I just think that the courts are antiquated right now, and they don't have the means to be able to allow people to have these feeds, which they should, because we're moving to this age now where it's citizen journalism. It is there, the MSN is not trusted. It's not watched. And so we do need this access, but it's just going to take time. And I love, what Dave is doing, trying to fight these people and try to get this access, because I love his commentary, and I'd rather watch that than just bland CNN feeds or whatever.
So yeah, and so like I have a production company. It's not just me, right? So I'm not. I mean, I am a fly-by-night guy, but it's not just me like walking in with my cameras. I do have a production company that's well known in the area that would be operating my cameras and doing things like that. And so, and I guess the most troubling thing is that I've been talking with the court staff and the clerk for so long and talking about where I'm going to set everything up. I had a meeting with the IT department to wire in, do a direct feed with the court's microphones, and everything like that was set up. And then all of a sudden there's another company, a local ABC affiliate that's taking it over, and they won't allow me to have access. It's just frustrating, I guess, more than anything.
Well, I mean, does there need to be a line somewhere though? I mean, because if 800 people want to have their own individual cameras in a courtroom, it's going to turn into a circus. To the point. I think if we just went to where the court has their own designated camera system, audio system, allow whoever wants to patch into it, or they stream it themselves and allow everyone to rebroadcast, I think would be the best solution to all of it.
Well, they are doing that with Zoom. So they do have that via Zoom that's going to be broadcast out there for anyone to have access to and restream and whatever. My thing is that it even says in the order that this is a pooled media feed for media sources to have access to. But it also limits it to 4 networks only. And that is it. And it cuts it off. And I guess that's my issue. Can the court say we're going to have one camera in there, or one, camera operating crew in there? We're going to have a pooled media feed, but it's only open to 4 networks. That's, I guess, my biggest problem. Can the court limit it that way?
I take it one step further. Say they can limit to the 4 people, but can those 4 outlets claim copyright restrictions over a publicly accessible proceeding?
No.
See, and that's why I don't think it, and that's where Law and Crime got into their mess, where they started copyright claiming people that were restreaming their public feeds. They learned the hard way that you can't do that.
Yeah, but you know what? It's still worth it to them. That's the really annoying part, because okay, Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and put a copyright claim on you. You do a counterclaim. Fine, your stream's garbage for a week. So good luck to you next week when everybody's already seen it everywhere else or on my feed. And I feel like these tactics are disturbing. It's kind of like, anytime people abuse the copyright system, I feel like there's no recourse to say, okay, well, wait a minute. If somebody steals your work and it is a true copyright infringement, like they grab this stream right now, for example. Mm-hmm. Now, by the way, feel free, clip away on this stream and share it out.
Exactly.
It's lay about law. But don't take the entire stream, slap an intro and something on the end and say, here we go, here's my stuff. That to me is a copyright infringement.
Yes, when you do the 8-hour streams and then you have like 10 seconds of something that gets claimed and you can't re-edit it because you've gone over the magic 6 hours. But I think if someone makes an improper copyright claim or an ungrounded copyright claim, they should get the strike. They should get a full-on strike.
I agree. Yes, because you are knowingly or unknowingly abusing the copyright system, because I can use the same argument as a person who is infringing on somebody else's copyright.
But
And then
guys,
that
it's
way
a
there's-
rigged game. It's a rigged game. The
Yeah.
larger channels, they contribute so much money to YouTube that they'll never. I hate to be so pessimistic, but it's just not going to happen.
Right.
I also
right.
hate to be Mr. Fixer, buddy, but would it make sense for you to do your 8-hour streams on your own website or on a website that's a little bit more liberal, and then be able to direct people over there, or is that just cut your views and cut your access entirely?
money? Bottom line,
yeah.
Ian, it's like if I hear all the time, and I'm sure you guys do, because what we bitch about YouTube and what's going on, and everybody says, yeah, why are you bitching about YouTube? Why don't you just go over to Rumble full time? Again, and I've talked about this. I love Rumble. This is on Rumble right now, by the way. People are watching. I'm thrilled to have them there. It's also on Locals. It's also on X. People are watching. However, all of you confirm to me, in terms of income that you earn on your video, what portion is Rumble? Because in my case, I would call it, other than rants, and I do thank people for that, I would call it a rounding error.
Well, and I would also say too, there's a difference between a billboard at Times Square and a billboard off the freeway in Albuquerque, right?
Yes.
Everyone's here on YouTube, and so that's the biggest problem. Hey, Chandler.
And I also hope to potentially lead people into alternative networks. So notice that everyone who actually makes money on Rumble has a deal with Rumble. There may be a couple exceptions, but everyone I know of who makes money on there. But notice that they all are feeding in from YouTube one way or another.
They are.
Aviva Fry will start a video, go 30 minutes, whatever amount of time, boom, jump to Rumble. Ricada Law, maybe an hour, boom, jump to Rumble. The only one that does something different is the Quartering, where he just does straight YouTube feeds and then blankets them everywhere too, and has a special Rumble show. But why is it that all these exclusives on Rumble are all on YouTube? Well, part of the deal is Rumble wants them to be on YouTube to funnel traffic into Rumble. And I don't blame them for that. I'm just saying that I don't think people completely understand that. And they complain to creators, I feel unfairly, who struggle with the YouTube game, because the bottom line, this is my job, folks. This is how I make a living.
Yeah.
Well, I just got to say, coming up, we're going to have to make a decision, because the AdSense revenue is not going to always be there. We're getting more and more censored. It's getting ridiculous, as Eric knows. So at some point in time, I've made the choice, this last year. I'm just trying to go off platform, trying to use the social media channels as advertising. I don't care. I'll boost a video because I want to get exposure to Substack, some place that allows me to publish pretty much unfettered. So I hope I see what you're saying, and I've been dealing with this for 5 years now, counseling creators. AdSense revenue can be huge. The problem is that you're just a couple of strikes away from losing everything, and that makes me super nervous, especially going into what's going on in 2024.
Exactly, and that's why I'm open for sponsors. Hello,
yeah,
come on by. Please come on by. But somebody asked a question about Dan Bongino. I don't know that he has a Rumble deal or not. I will say he owns a chunk of Rumble, if I recall. So I would call that kind of a deal.
Agreed.
Yeah.
He was, I believe, one of the main investors in Rumble early on, or a big investor in Rumble. So.
Yeah, just so you know, everybody, the kind of behind the scenes, everybody has those deals. Whenever you have a really powerful audience, you got deals with Facebook, you got deals with Instagram, you got deals with Rumble, you got deals with everything. So they're making, I think Candace Owens, just when she was, just coming up, she was making $35,000 a month on Facebook. So they all have deals.
What do you want to bet she's making about $100K or better now a month?
Oh, I think more. Daily Wire pays good. And, they're supported by the Koch brothers and other large benefactors. So they got lots of money over there.
Come on, my viewers. I want deals. Watch me more. Come on, people.
I know we will, Jeff.
I want deals.
All right. Well, while we have you here, Ian, let me see. I want to share your tweet, and welcome, Chandler.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I'm late.
Hey.
No worries. Happy to have you. All right. You were going to talk about
Oh yeah.
A non-controversial subject like war powers and the president. And one of my personal gripes, which is that I feel that Congress has abdicated their responsibility decades ago, and it was something the founding fathers did not foresee. I think when they thought the balance of power, well, here's how we're going to work it. The president can only do so much. Congress has to authorize this, but Congress said, well, you know what? I could just let the president do whatever the hell he wants, build up all that administration, and then I can run on bitching about it, even though it's my fault as an institution that this shit is going on.
Yes.
So help us out with the War Powers Act.
Well,
and
let's talk story time. I mean, let's talk about, you're right, the founding fathers didn't envision that America would have top secret and black op forces across the world, everywhere, including Africa and Australia and all these different places, and that we could move within hours to a military action. And so that kind of played itself out in the 60s. And then in 1973, there was a rise out of people saying, listen, this is ridiculous. That only Congress can declare war. Back in the day, the mobilization took so much time that made sense. But back in 1973, it was getting to the point where the president was just doing whatever the heck he wanted to do. So actually, the bill was passed in the House and Senate, and then President Nixon actually vetoed the bill. But they were able to get a 2/3 majority and get the law passed. And long and short, I hate to belabor the law, even though I love it. Basically, the law just says, listen, Congress can declare war. President, you can do this. You can, if you give us 48 hours notice of some sort of military action in a foreign country, you just have to let us know what is it, the scope of it is, how long, the extent of the duration, and the legal authority behind it. There's got to be some sort of legal grounding behind it. So what's happened over time, and especially with respect to the Biden administration, is that kind of following of the law has been eroded. So now the president barely even makes a statement, makes a notice to Congress. He kind of just says, I'm going here because the Houthis are attacking 2,000 ships. I think it's in the best interest of America. So we're going to send 100, or more Tomahawk missiles into Yemen. And that's what's happened last night. Basically, the U.S., England, little reported Canada, Australia, and some other companies participated in the strike against. Pardon?
Bahrain was one of which I think is significant.
I think it is too, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, they launched this, strike with Tomahawk missiles from ships and from submarines and from airplanes, kind of under our noses. They did a press release or kind of a notice that supposedly complies with the War Powers Act last night. So we, kind of after the news cycle. And then proceeded to bomb the hell out of 60 different targets in Yemen, directed at the Houthis, which are a group of people. I've done my research. It's so hard to figure out exactly what their agenda is. But the bottom line is they don't like America, they don't like Israel, and they don't like Saudi Arabia. And so they do whatever they can to hurt those interests. And so what the news is not really clear just yet. What targets were attacked, what were hit. Presumably they're not civilian, but we don't know. But the real issue in this situation is the president is supposed to give notice with 3 different statutory requirements. And he's got to talk about what is the action he is going to do, contemplate. He's got to give legal authority for it. And then, of course, he's got to describe the duration and what the scope of the action is so that we know it's a confined military action. In this case, if you go over the statement that President Biden gave yesterday, the written statement, it does not comply with the legislative authority. It does not comply with the extent of the duration, doesn't describe the details of the action. And as a result, my opinion is he's in violation of the War Powers Act. So your question is, okay, so he violated the law. He's the president of the United States. Can he go to jail? Can he be sued? What is the situation? And unfortunately, the only remedy at this time would be impeachment. And so there is some talk out there. And I made a video today. It's on X, it's on YouTube, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, explaining impeachment and explaining what the remedy is for violations of the War Powers Act. And at this time, I'm also super skeptical. I don't know if this is a planned thing, if Biden was led to do this, violate the War Powers Act by his people who want him to not be a candidate in 2024? We don't know, but this is clearly an impeachable offense, and we're sitting there scratching our heads.
Well, there's a great book it's old now. It's from 1989. Written by one of my law school professors, Ed Firmage, who was a big constitutional law guy. It's called "To Chain the Dogs of War: The War Powers of Congress in History," and it's a fascinating book. And it's legal based, but even non-lawyers can figure it out. And it talks about exactly what you've just talked about. And that was how I got through law school. Was just the upperclassmen going, look, when you take Ed Firmage's test, just say the president does not have the power to declare war as many times as possible in as many different ways as possible. And you'll get
it's like the old school chat GDP.
Yeah. It's a great book to chain the dog of war. And I'd recommend, even though it's like from 89, but it's still very, very relevant today.
Well, who has the power to declare the end of a war? That's not actually specifically mentioned in the Constitution. And so, no. But is it possible for Congress to pass a law that even, this one right here is about invoking and sending troops, but is it possible for Congress to declare or to pass a law that says the president shall remove troops from Yemen or wherever he is?
Absolutely. Right, absolutely.
Is it constitutional? On this. Have they? Okay.
Yeah,
they're currently having hearings on it, or
no. They have the power to conduct hearings and to get more information and to inquire into this potential violation of the War Powers Act. I think now, I don't know if you've seen the press about it, the left is getting increasingly angry, or at least that's what the mainstream media is reporting. Like, left rages at President Biden for strike in Yemen. Those are some of the headlines. I think one of them is in the Daily Mail. So that's what leads me to believe that this could be all kind of a plan to get him out as the potential candidate. I don't know, but it is weird. It's if I was just, I'm just a lawyer, in Scottsdale, Arizona, but if someone said, Ian, draft up the notice compliant with the War Powers Act, I certainly would be able to follow those 3 requirements and be able to make a statement that's cogent and relevant and complies with the law. So it is weird how those things were left out and we have technical violations of the act.
Wait, I'm trying to follow your logic here. So your logic is that this act was done as a way to preclude Biden from being an appealing candidate?
No, I'm letting you know
I must
that
have missed what you were saying.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll try to be more clear. So what I'm saying is that Biden didn't follow the act. It's easy to follow the act. And the mainstream media is criticizing Biden and saying the left doesn't like Biden because he violated the act.
I see. Okay. Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
Well, are they talking about, I haven't been following this at all. Are they talking about an impeachment hearing for Biden now?
No, they're not. This is, literally this happened yesterday. The reason why I even went to impeachment is just because the remedy. What's the remedy for violating the War Powers Act by the president? There has to be one, and that's the only one that's been pointed to as a remedy for the past violations of the act or alleged violations of the act.
Yeah,
isn't
that's
that
the only thing that I know of.
That's Trump's argument right now, is that the president, while acting in his official capacity as president, cannot essentially violate. Matter of fact, that's Nixon's argument too. The president can't violate the law. But the only remedy would be an impeachment. You'd have to impeach him.
Yeah. That's the only remedy at this stage. So it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is when it's easy to comply with the law and he didn't do it, and he's setting himself up for impeachment, why did he do that? It's easy.
But wouldn't that make it? But you could also make the argument every president has violated the War Powers Act.
For at least recent presidents,
yes. For those Trump supporters, when he bombed Syria, that was technically a violation of the War Powers Act, and the same thing with Obama with some of those drone strikes.
Well, again, I want to be real clear. We're talking about technical violations of the War Powers Act versus an arguable violation. In other words, you're saying by bombing Syria, that is a declaration of war, which is usurping the power of Congress. That's more the substantive argument. I'm making the technical argument, which is, listen, let's move past that. Is it a war? You can argue that it's not. You could argue that it is. And most of the Congress people who are on the left are arguing that it's declaration of war. But what I'm trying to say is that all you got to do in order to qualify as a military action on a foreign country is to follow these requirements. He did one, but not two.
Wow. Okay, I guess I don't have much confidence that anything is going to happen to him. I don't even think that you're going to have a Republican majority in the House for too long at the rate they're dropping like flies, retiring, quitting, becoming heads or presidents of universities. Sadly, not the Ivy League.
Indicted of fraud.
Yeah, or anything else. So let's jump to a story that I found or literally just came in this morning. And I think it's hilarious because it's a repeat of an old phenomenon known as the Streisand effect. And this story involves the lovely lady herself, again, Barbara Streisand.
Oh.
Apparently, or allegedly, her film company pocketed $200,000 in small business pandemic cash, no shock there, and they'd used it to pay the gardener at her $20 million mansion. So my question, and what I thought we'd be discussing or could discuss, is I have a funny feeling that what she did was not in fact illegal or, quote, fraudulent. It's just probably disgusting. And is this the only recourse to deal with this kind of thing, by publicly shaming her? And maybe that'll encourage people to buy fewer albums, sell fewer tickets or whatever to get a little bit back, because I believe that's taxpayer money that she's scraping.
Yeah, okay, so the small business loan thing or whatever, the vid thing was, if you have certain employees and you don't let them go as a result of the vid, then you're able to claim essentially kind of like a grant for not terminating people's employment during this and maintaining their employment. So if she, I mean, I guess in theory it would apply to an individual that employs other individuals. I don't know if she's operating her $20 million estate through some sort of LLC or something. I have to imagine that they separate it out somehow.
Yeah, it's a company.
In theory, I think she's probably technically was entitled to it. It just looks really bad, right?
Oh, yeah, I think. But yeah, in the article, it does say her Barwood Films Limited received the loans from the Payback Protection Act in 2021 and then had them written off by the federal government. And then among the workers paid through Barwood Films was a groundskeeper responsible for the gardens at her $20 million Malibu clifftop home, which I'm pretty sure is the original home that caused the Streisand effect.
Yeah.
Because
Yes, it is. Yes.
those who are not familiar with the Streisand effect, there was I don't know if you would call a map maker, but essentially someone who took pictures of the coastline from a plane to track all this in the early '80s. Had nothing to do with the houses. It was just taking pictures of the coastline. And she was like, oh my God, my house is up on the web. And of course, I think maybe a couple dozen people had seen the actual web page that saw that, because it was a very boring, typical government funded or whatever site of just, pictures of the coastline. Nobody cared. As soon as she did this, of course, then everybody went, oh, let's go look at her house. So her complaining caused everybody to actually go look at her house, which nobody had looked at to begin with, or very few. Nobody cared about until she said it. Thus the term the Streisand effect.
Map maker, make me a map. Sorry.
No, I love it, and I love that she keeps bringing up her home in these issues. But yeah, I mean, it just looks really bad. Meanwhile, like true small businesses that did keep their employees on, that got fractions of what she got, are being run through the ringer and forced to file all these compliance paperworks and documents and threat of recouping it from the IRS. And she gets that much money when she can obviously, I don't know. I feel like she probably could afford it without the government loan and or the forgiveness of it.
No, Dave. She's only worth $400 million. So
well, that's how the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. They know how to get it where it comes from and how to milk the system.
Did Mr. Beast get some PPP loan or something like that? Like everybody got some PPP money, and
he
like
have.
one out of every $6 was fraudulent or something like that. So.
No, well, if he did as well, just because I like him as a creator doesn't mean he shouldn't be hemmed up too. I'm not hypocritical about this stuff. I don't like anyone who's abusing the system.
Yeah.
It's perfect with her with, again, the Streisand effect.
Yeah, I mean, but it was out there. The idea is that companies were taking a hit and they wanted people to keep employed. And financially, it might have made sense from a unemployment standpoint, because if people are unemployed, then they're a drain on the tax, the tax-paying public anyways. But this way, they actually maintain their employment. They're able to then consume at the places that were still open and keep the economy going. So it made sense somewhat why you wanted to do it. But then, like any good program, there's always those people that take advantage of it.
Well, maybe they need to have standards put in there. Like, how about you show that there's actually a loss? Like having gardeners at a private estate. Is she giving tours? Is it a business? Can I go visit? I have a feeling probably not, considering how she reacted before. But if it's a private estate and it's run by this film group, that's not exactly the same as, say, a restaurant, which I know, was brutalized. Restaurants were horribly brutalized. I'm angry to find out that Outback Steakhouse has shut down near me, which pisses me off. I know I'm not a highbrow eater, but I liked Outback Steakhouse as an example, where it really did make sense, where they were struggling to get by. They were drawing in some money, but not enough to keep it going. And that, little bit could help keep the employees on hand until they could right the ship. And ultimately, the tax dollars would make up the difference.
Well, to be fair, though, if you have a fairly large accounting firm with corporate headquarters, right, the landscaper isn't essential for that accounting firm to operate, but you still want the lawn mowed. Right.
Again, that's a business. That's a public business, and it's traffic. You're advertising to the people going in and out. Barbara Streisand's house, again, is she offering tours to her house? How is that affecting the business or the public? I'm just curious.
Well, I don't know. I still think technically she's probably, at least on the cursory look that I've taken, she's probably okay with doing it. It just looks really bad.
Oh yeah, I said it's probably legal right from the jump, but legal.
She can't cut all that grass herself, Eric.
She can smoke it.
It's close to La Brea. We don't want it to return back to Jurassic Park and stuff
It's
like that.
not close to La Brea. What are you talking about?
It's closer to La Brea than I am.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, if it's legal.
I just wanted to say one thing. It's another grift from the higher ups. This PPP.
Check.
My company, my legal documents company, got PPP money. When we went through the process, we had lots of forms to fill out. We had lots of justification as far as employees departing as a result of the thing that we suffered in 2020. And then the other part was the banks led us to believe, listen, you can take this money, but it's subject to being paid back. It wasn't like, here's a free, $1,000 or a couple $1,000. It was like, you're able to take this money, but you're going to probably have to pay it back. So I think the higher ups didn't get that message. I think the higher ups just said, listen, just apply for as much freaking money as you can get. We're probably not going to have to pay it back. You won't have to pay it back. And so a lot of these people got away with it when kind of honest business owners who actually suffered as a result of the thing in 2020 really were trying to cut down because they thought, holy crap, I'm going to have to pay this thing back.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, shifting gears completely. This is a case that I wanted to hear more about because it's sort of in the press all the time. Chandler, I think you are familiar with it. The whole Gypsy Rose case. And yes. I find that Munchausen syndrome by proxy, I find to be one of the most despicable, disturbing behaviors out there. And I'm just kind of curious what exactly went down with that. She went to prison. She's out now, kind of being celebrated. It's a sort of a weird scenario. So can you talk us through, what the original case was and what's going on with this?
Yes, absolutely. So Gypsy Rose Blanchard was a victim of what is now called medical child abuse, but what was previously termed Munchausen syndrome by proxy or factitious disorder. Her mother had raised her in such a fashion where she convinced both her daughter and the general public, doctors, a plethora of people, her entire community, that her daughter was terminally ill. She put her on tons of medications that had an extremely deleterious effect on
Deleterious, I think.
effect on her health, on her well-being. And she had her in a wheelchair, but Gypsy was sort of aware that she could walk and was sort of confused as to, why am I in a wheelchair all the time? She would take her to lots of different hospitals. The mother was very abusive. And it turned out that over time, Gypsy wanted more freedom. She met a man on ChristianSingles.com named Nicholas Godejohn, and she was trying to escape her life with her mother, who was pretty much kind of like a CO. It was like she was like basically in prison. She was constantly being taken for invasive medical procedures for medical conditions that she did not have. She was actually perfectly healthy. Fast forward
she even had her tear ducts removed, if I remember correctly.
Did she?
Her mother had her tear ducts removed. I mean, that's how terrible this thing was.
I don't recall that detail, but that is horrific, and I would believe that that's accurate. I can't remember exactly what the year was. I know that she served an 8-year prison sentence, the point at which she and her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, that she had met him. She had basically, told him sort of what was going on with her mother, and he had homicidal tendencies. And so she convinced him to murder her mother so that they could escape and sort of like spirit her away from the house after the abuse had become increasingly volatile and her mother had, chained her to the bed, etc. So he comes in, he kills the mother. They escape, and then they're caught. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison for facilitating the murder. She did not actually participate in the murder. She had, no physical interaction, with her mother in a way that, resulted in the mother dying, but the boyfriend did. So the boyfriend is currently serving life in prison. Meanwhile, she served 8 years for second-degree murder, and she was just released. So there's a lot of discussion now about, should we be celebrating her? Is she a victim? Was she complicit in some of these actions? And I've seen a lot of discussion, especially about Nicholas Godejohn and whether he deserves to be in prison for life because he has a lower IQ. He's on the autism spectrum. He did have homicidal tendencies and he was very violent. But the question is, why should she be released when it seems as though the argument is sort of that she might have convinced him to do this thing and he would have never been in prison if not for her situation, and the fact that she's able to now be free and have a husband and live her life and, be a social media star is just sort of, it feels wrong to certain people.
Me too. I mean, that literally, when I saw that she came out and I looked up that guy, I figured, okay, well, he's probably coming out in a few years because, he did the deed. And then I'm like, life without parole. So wait a minute, hold on. She orchestrated it, I thought, according to the charges. So last time I checked, okay, if let's say somebody murders a spouse and it turns out the husband hired said other person to murder the spouse, that husband typically goes away for life all the way up to and including capital punishment for doing, even though they didn't actually pull the trigger, they had somebody else do it, and it could be somebody hired.
Well, I think the underlying issue I've seen, and I remember watching the documentary during the vid. It came out, I think, in 2017, the documentary on HBO about her. And I watched it in 2020, and then all of a sudden she was being released. So I kind of rewatched it. She was very childlike, even in like there's home videos and other things like that in the documentary, but even in court, when she makes her first appearances and stuff, she's extremely childlike. And then you see her talk now. There's been some newer documentaries released, so they've interviewed her from prison and stuff right before she was going up to the parole board. And you can definitely sense a difference in her personality and her mindset. And so also the prosecutor in that case felt like she was a victim, but still also a perpetrator to some extent, and felt like maybe she was more of a victim than perpetrator, but still was responsible. So got some time. So it's not like the husband that hires someone to kill the wife. That's a fully functioning, forming adult. This is a very immature, socially stunted person because of what her mom did. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
But the quote killer also, it sounds like, was emotionally stunted, not necessarily capable. And again, if everything that was being done to her was monstrous, I don't know, battered wife syndrome kind of comes into mind or whatever. I actually understand the defense with her. I kind of wonder if she should have gone away that long anyway, if she was being abused to such a scary degree. But then wasn't he kind of a hero in a weird sense? I don't know. I'm never going to justify a crime. I'm just saying that's got to be a mitigation. I mean, he is away for life. We have some really sick puppies who are getting out of prison in 15 years, 10 years, or whatever. And again, I'm not saying nobody should serve time. I'm just saying these two standards, they don't seem to line up to me. And I'm not a lawyer.
It's challenging. I mean, he did save her from a horrific situation. And to be clear, the medications that she was on had a very strong effect on her brain development and her thinking and her cognition and her ability to reason, her ability to perceive her situation. He did save her, but the problem is that this is a young man who, he had a very negative social history. I believe he was arrested for public exposure and indecency at a McDonald's for watching pornography publicly, and that sort of thing. He was
obviously not that bright and socially adept.
Right, that's true. But he also was very enthusiastic about the premise of murdering the mother because he wanted to do that. He had fantasies about acting out violence against people and wanted an opportunity to unalive somebody. So he was enthusiastic about it. He willingly enacted it. Now, the problem is that he could have saved her from this situation simply by tying up the mom or spiriting Gypsy away in the middle of the night. He didn't really need to unalive her, but he did. But she also facilitated it. So there are a lot of challenges with this situation. I wonder whether he was taken advantage of by her because she knew about his tendencies and his proclivities. I don't know how desperate she was. I don't know how easily she could have escaped. She could walk. She had 2 legs. She was, able to walk, even though she and her mother both showed the world, that she couldn't walk, that she was in a wheelchair. She did participate in some of the, misleading of doctors. They got all these free trips to Disney World and things like that. I wonder how involved she was.
We're talking about Gypsy Rose, Joe.
Yeah. I wonder how engaged she was.
Well, I just want to say one thing. My interest in this is purely the public. Why in the world, if you go on TikTok right now, are there multi-zillion view videos? And it's not about the story. It's not about little clips of the documentaries. It's actually Gypsy Rose on the red carpet going to some premiere. I think Chandler referred to it earlier on. She's being celebrated. And listen, we can go through the empathy about, boy, she was mistreated, and boy, should her boyfriend would have killed the mother or whatever. But the point of it is where is that coming from? Does anybody know? I didn't go into this because I was like, I can't understand this story. I don't know why it's interesting. With all
I agree. She wasn't like the West Memphis 3 where they determined not guilty, so they're celebrating. Hey, you got out. You were wrongly, or something like that. It's literally, oh, look, she's out. Hey, wait a minute here. And I feel like it's almost like the Me Too timeline. Like she had the misfortune of doing it right before Me Too got hot. Like maybe if she just waited a year or two, she could have been on the cover of Time versus in prison. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, there is an argument, sort of. I mean, I have a lot of challenges with this story, but there is an argument, sort of, that people have been making money off of her story for this entire time that she has been in prison, 8 years. And so some say that, well, why shouldn't she be able to, make money off of her story now? She's not employable. She never had an education. She's not really in a position to, go work at a call center or something like that. I mean, I suppose that she could, but, the idea is, why shouldn't she make money off of her own story when it happened to her, when she lived her, that life? I don't know necessarily if I agree with that, but I do. I wonder what other people think of that.
Well, okay, that goes back to another story about the Gigolo Beach or whatever killer, that they're trying to change the law to say that not only can a criminal, who's tried for it, make money off of their story or what they did, but even the family members. So we actually have both extremes in the headlines if you want to look at that particular scenario. I'm going to shift, though, to particularly, this is going to be a very interesting discussion, I have a feeling, or I could be surprised that everybody will agree. But we have to be extremely careful on our language and things like that in describing the story and what happened, because it involves a trans individual, an act that was going on, and an unaliving that happened upon the discovery of the person being not who they said they were, or who the perpetrator thought they were. And Nate, talk us through it in a very careful way, because your video hasn't been demonetized yet.
Oh, you're talking about that video. All right.
Is there a name? Can we get a name?
All right. So yes. All right. So this guy's walking down the street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A woman comes up to him and says, "Hey, I would like to have some fun with you." He says, "Sure, let's do it. It's my lucky day." She starts engaging in some oral pleasure. Then he starts thinking, those hands, they don't seem like the hands I expect. So after his suspicion, he realized that the gender of the person he was with happened not to be the gender that he thought the person was.
Or we'll even say sex for the argument on that.
Yes, sex. The person was a biological
sex. Yeah.
Male versus being a biological female. So this brings us to our first legal quandary. The first argument by the gentleman was like, this was an assault by trick or deception. He was deceived into consenting to an act, and this person deceived him by claiming they were one gender, and they were one sex, and they were not. So after the act, this person got enraged and then unalived the person who gave them the oral pleasure. Now, the argument is the state is arguing that this is a murder. Classic, just second-degree murders. The person was killed, blah, 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 blah. And then I believe he took some cash off this particular person. So the state's also arguing that this was an armed robbery. And because the killing happened within an armed robbery, it's felony murder. The trans community, which this person was a part of, is arguing that this should be considered a hate crime because the person was killed because of their identity. And the defendant is arguing that this was at most, well, first they're arguing that this was justified because he was essentially, this was a sexual assault, in that instance because of the consent issue. But they're also arguing that even if you consider this to be unlawful, this would not be a murder, but a manslaughter of the voluntary variety, because this is a heat of passion. He was so enraged that he had given consent to a person of one particular sex, that he was so enraged after the act that he did this. Now, the difference between obviously a voluntary manslaughter and murder is one is 20 to life, one is 20 years, and the other is a life sentence. Now, the contention here is that whether his consent argument holds any water, whether this is a voluntary manslaughter or a murder in a second degree, and whether this can be described as a hate crime. So that's the full story.
Beast. What?
So
Joe, take it away.
Joe is obviously has deep thoughts about this. It's normal that this kind of thing might. No, I'm just kidding. Joe.
Yeah. Also, just one more fact that I did leave out because I think it's irrelevant, but I don't want people to say, "Nate, you're trying to protect this person." So the person who was unalived, unfortunately, was a wanted felon for an armed robbery themselves, and at the time of the death was wanted for multiple felonies. So was actually an active warrant.
Oh, no, that's very irrelevant, though.
It is irrelevant.
That's what I said. It was irrelevant.
No. It could be interesting because when was this person wanted for robbing other people who might have been in the middle of the same activity? I'm just curious, and I don't know if that's a factor or not, but I thought pattern behavior, if they lined up, could be relevant.
To be fair, I don't know the full details, but I think it's just totally irrelevant to this particular situation. But I think just in the benefit of giving everybody the full details, that's it. But I understand the lawyers up here would understand that fact that she was even a wanted fugitive would be irrelevant to this particular.
It's irrelevant
likely
unless the
in a
defendant
mutual,
saw
right?
the APP with the guy's photo in the middle of the act or something.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true. But,
well, I only ask because, for example, serial killers who have a kit, they do bring up previous crimes because of that. So that's the only reason I asked. Is if
it's
but not for the victim.
It's irrelevant as to him, because as to his defenses, he can only rely on what he knows
at the time.
He can't get lucky and he can't get unlucky. So it kind of works both ways in that respect. So he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that this person is wanted for felonies. He doesn't know this person has a history of things. So his actions in the moment can only be based on what he knows. So it's irrelevant.
All right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, we're all going to agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say my only thought on this thing is that it to me, it sounds, having been a prosecutor, it sounds like murder. Certainly there is a heat of passion manslaughter, but usually it's as the law recognizes that passion. So it's like you catch your significant other with another person or something. This does not appear to be something that the law recognizes as a heat of passion. So it rises to a higher level.
Ian, let me change the scenario for a moment. We have a woman who's the defendant that did the unaliving, and she claims that a man climbed into bed with her that she thought was her husband, and then after the act was completed, realized that it was a complete stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Or a twin, Nate.
And then attacks and unalives him. I mean, do you still see that as murder based off of?
But now we're talking about two different things, because we have to split the difference between fraud in the inducement and fraud in fact. Because when it comes to sexual assault, there is a difference, right?
That's
sexual
true.
assault does not apply to fraud in the inducement. It only applies to fraud in fact.
That's
so,
true.
for example, if you go to a bar and you try to pick up a girl and you say, "Hey, I have the Medal of Honor. I have 3 tours," and she's like, "That sounds great. I'd like to have sex with you," and it turns out I'm a liar. That is not rape, because I've only tricked her in sort of the inducement.
Or great.
If I say I'm going to have sex with you, and then it turns out to be a different person, then we're talking about fraud in fact, and that is sexual assault. So the person not being who she thought she would be fraud in fact, and that's the difference.
Well,
Nate,
maybe we need to go
twins?
back to I've been thinking of the old Jenny Jones murder back in the mid '90s, where she brought a guest on under the
oh god, yeah,
the premise of I'm going there's someone has a crush on you, and it turns out it was a dude from the same school, and he went over to the guy's house and blew him away. And I think that they called that the gay panic defense, but he got second degree murder out of it.
But that was also in the 1990s or 1980s,
Yeah.
So we're in a different mode. So
About
Nate,
95, 96,
you were telling me on the phone about a case involving identical twins.
Yes. So, uncivil law is right, but in this particular case, the issue of consent has been evolving in the past couple of years, and the issue here is the person, it's what you are consenting to versus what you're not consenting to. And the argument by the defendant, if it's going to make it, is whether they were consenting to have this particular act with this particular person who's this particular sex versus and with that and does that, now if the person says I'm whatever or something different, is that the same as saying, I'm a war veteran, right? War veteran is different than I am this particular, so that's the argument for the defense, and they're saying that I consented to this. Now, the other issue was with the twin. So in New Jersey, it was in Connecticut, there were twin brothers. One had a tattoo on his buttocks and the other one did not. So and he was a cop. So the cop twin brother calls over the brother's girlfriend to the house and says, "Hey," and pretending to be his brother. So he says, "Hey, come over to the house." The girlfriend comes over to the house and he pretends to be his brother. He says, "Hey, do you want to have sex?" She says yes.
That sounds like fraud in fact.
They go into, this is definitely, they go into the room and they have relations. So then after he's trying to drive her home, so she realized, she's like, oh, why are you taking your brother's car? He's like, oh, don't worry about it. But then the thing that really busted him was the tattoo, but the fact that he didn't know where she lived. So he's driving her home, but she's like, because he's never been to her house before. So it's like, I don't know where she lives. So he was arrested and charged, but this was the issue. Even though he was, they were saying, well, consent was actually given. It was all consent, all consent. So they did. So the issue here was, what was she consenting to? Was she consenting to the act, or was she consenting to the act with a particular person? So again, but he pled guilty. He got probation, and he didn't do any jail time, even though this
probation. Wow, he got off lucky.
It seems similar. It really kind of seems similar to me, because it's not like he said, "Hi, I'm Joe." Blah blah blah. He just went with the person, assuming he was that other person, and perpetrated a fraud. Yeah. How is that different than this scenario we're talking about right now?
Two great points made by this panel so far. First, number one is, a lot of people walk up and say, "Hi, I'm Joe." You have to make sure it's really Joe. Second of all, I think that
Joel.
I think that this distinction of fraud and inducement, fraud and fact by uncivil, is really astute, and it's a very difficult line to draw, because you're trying to figure out, exactly what we're talking about, as to, like, is this fraud and inducement, or is it fraud in fact? I mean, I think you all seem to be naturally leaning toward it being fraud in the inducement, but
I'm thinking in fact. But whatever.
You think it's fraud in fact? So
I'm not a lawyer.
I'll ask this panel right here. You know what?
No, I think it's inducement. Yeah, I think it's inducement.
You see,
because
you thought it was fraud in fact. You thought it was fraud in the inducement.
So it's a twin. But you said the twin.
The twin. Yeah. What are we talking about? The twin hypothetical is fraud in fact.
It's not hypothetical. It's actual.
The underlying situation we were talking about with the gay transgender person, that's fraud in the inducement.
How is it different?
Yeah, it's such a tight line to find. Yeah, so try to instead of giving an example, you sort of have to draw a bright line as to where it is.
And they're not hypotheticals. It's two actual cases.
Well, in the case, I suppose in the case of the transgender person, they are not making any representations beyond what you can see.
Neither is the brother.
Well, I don't know, because they're trying to replace the role of someone else. As a reasonably prudent person might make the confusion between the two.
I would say the trans person is taking the role of another person in that scenario too.
So have we talked about identity? It's literally identity. And by the way, that is in fact a woman. Ask anyone.
Yeah,
this is crazy. I knew this story was crazy.
This is why it's good.
I apologize if we missed it, but have we talked about gay panic defense or LGBT panic defense?
That's what this guy's essentially.
Yeah. That was my first
saying, but they're trying to make new law and saying this is because this is a crime of passion, because someone in his position would have reacted the same way. But again, the law generally doesn't recognize the gay panic defense. But in this case, he's saying because of his Christian values and all that stuff.
Yeah. The crying game is another one. Good point.
Okay, what state is this in, by the way, Nate?
I want everybody to vote on this. Ian, is this fact or inducement? Let's go down the line.
I'd like to define. Can we just define fraud in fact and fraud by inducement?
Okay, sure. Kurt, can you define?
I'll give the short version. So suppose I'm buying a car, or I'm a car dealer and I want to sell you a car. So fraud in the inducement would be like, come on, bait and switch, right? Come on down. I've got this great car for you for sale. But of course, I never had the car, right? It was just to get you on my lot. And then I'm like, well, here's this other car. That car just went off the lot. Here's this other car. That's fraud in the inducement. It's not fraud in fact, because you did know at the end what you were actually buying.
Okay.
So my fraud was in the nature of getting you there or getting you to agree, not misrepresenting what it was. Versus me misrepresenting what it was. So I'm like, this car is completely great. And I know that it's not, right? That's why this is fraud, right? This car is completely great, mechanically sound. Everything is fantastic. I know,
but it's a lemon.
So I'm misrepresenting what it is in fact.
Okay.
So in this hypothetical, I didn't trick you by the inducement, because my ad was genuine. It's just that what I represent it to be is not what it is. So that's the short definition. Does that help?
It does help.
Okay.
But it's really challenging because what are the facts? Because I think that we're now living in a world where the fact of what is a woman is being called into question. And so it's so legally there is a gray area in a really major way. I want to know what people are going to vote. I'm curious.
Well, listen to this definition.
I'm doing a poll, by the way, so
Fraudulent
everybody can
inducement
get a vote.
takes place when the defendant's deception persuades the victim to have sex, but does not cause the victim to believe that he or she is consenting to something other than intercourse. It's also known as rape by deception.
By the way, can we stop using the 4-letter R word, guys? I'm trying to stay with it. Kurt, you did it.
well.
Nate, you did it. Great. We're doing good. Just
Hey,
great.
it's a legal term.
I know,
We're having
I don't
a legal
care.
discussion, man.
I know, but we're in YouTube world. It's called fantasy.
I think grapes are superior.
I am sorry you used a word you cannot use. That's not the context. That's what you're going to be talking to when you're arguing with someone, right? You're going to be talking to somebody in France who talks like that.
Yeah.
But now,
Those
based
French-
on
those French
that,
YouTubers.
So first vote, Ian, because I know he's short on time. What is it?
I love this word, inducement.
Okay. All right. Dave.
Fact. I
Nice.
say it's in fact.
All right. I'm going to skip Nate for now because I know Nate's put a lot into this and just go down to Jeff.
I will have to say inducement.
Chandler.
Fact.
Okay. Joe.
It's arguably both.
Pick
Yeah,
one.
I have to choose.
Pick one.
Both.
Fence sitter.
No,
This
what
is-
I'm saying is you can have both. You can have
Yes.
both. And
You've
if
got
you
to-
have-
the purpose of this-
and if you have both, you can have both. And I think if you have both under the law, that would be deemed
Yes.
they deemed by the toward the defendant. Wait, it would it would probably be classified under the law as fraud in fact if it's both.
As long as you have fraud in fact,
You ignore the fraud in the
he would have a
inducement.
justification defense.
I think
no, but hold on.
I think it's definitely
maybe.
fraud. It's definitely fraud in the inducement. You can't argue that he was induced into doing this act
Bye,
because he of his thoughts, right? So there is definitely fraud in the inducement. No, I think even Chandler, who said fraud in fact, would recognize that. Yeah, why did you do this? Because it was fraud in the inducement. But I think ultimately, when he's performing, when as far as like what he is engaging in, is he thinks he's engaging in heterosexual intercourse, and he's not. So I think that qualifies as fraud in fact ultimately, and under the law, in the eyes of the law, that I think it should be deemed fraud in fact, even though there was also fraud in the inducement.
Well, hold on. I do want to make it very clear though that why are we making this distinction? Because fraud in the inducement can also be criminal, and fraud in fact can also be criminal. We
were trying to make the
distinction
difference to whether or not there was a sexual assault occurring on him that might relate to the justification.
because fraud. All right, so here are some examples of fraud in the inducement that leads to fraudulent medical procedures, spousal or other impersonations. I'm reading this directly from the law, or misrepresentations regarding the offender's sexually transmitted disease or status. So those are some examples of fraud in the inducement that could lead to sexual assault allegations. So I think if we're making the distinction to say whether this distinction, I understand it's interesting, but it's meaningless in terms of the law, because if you can make this, if you're saying it's fraudulent inducement in these particular instances, you can have a criminal charge based on just that.
But we're talking about in terms of the defense. I was under the impression, again, I'm not the lawyer, that fact was a higher level than inducement. And remember, this is this person's defense. And
yes, but so if the person is saying this person is an impersonating, that I think you get there, right? Because if you impersonate someone's spouse, you impersonate so the argument here would be this person is impersonating someone someone else. I thought this person was X, this person is a person. Or if we're talking about just, because you can also make the argument that trans person saying, I'm not impersonating, I am a woman. So I'm not impersonating anybody, so I don't know. It's a weird case.
It reminds me of the California stealthing laws.
I was just going to talk about California. Yeah,
Yeah.
In California, if let's say someone has some sort of disease and they keep that hidden, I believe that there's actually criminal statutes.
Yes.
It's a misdemeanor now, but yes.
Yeah. So fine. So if someone's so now the question, I don't. So in that scenario, let's assume that instead of being, a different gender, it was someone who had, some sort
HIV
of HIV, herpes, whatever.
That came up recently. There was actually a case like that came up recently. And it was something that I saw on Twitter, and I haven't seen it from a legal standpoint. There was an argument that a young woman made where she said that this guy, she posted these texts from this guy. He had apparently tricked her into having unprotected sex, and he had HIV. He was HIV positive, and then she came back HIV positive. When she confronted him, he said, "Yes, I knew, and I hid it from you." And so I learned that is, apparently, I don't know if it's a felony, but it is a prosecutable offense.
It was a felony. California reduced it to a misdemeanor like last year.
Okay.
Oh, good on them.
Yeah.
So in that instance, it's challenging because, well, I'm sorry, I kind of derailed it a little bit, but Joe, I wanted to hear what you were going to say.
You didn't at all. I think it's good because sometimes it's impossible to talk about something because it's so sensitive. So you have to come up with an analogy or whatever to talk about things more comfortably or hypothetical. But Nate, you're not off the hook. What is it? Inducement or fact?
I think Uncivil's right. It's inducement. I think you can make an argument that this person is there's an impersonation element to this. Just like, but I think the New Jersey story is both fact and inducement.
That's what I said. That's what this is.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so
there's no question. There's definitely inducement here. I mean, look, everyone here agrees he never would have agreed to it if he knew he was a man, right? So there's definitely in the inducement. But I think that is also ultimately in fact because he thinks that he's engaging in heterosexual intercourse and he's not.
But what if he made a religious argument? What if he was very religious and he argues that he was tricked into sodomy and that if he had known that it would have gone, against his very Christian beliefs? In that sense,
does that make it a hate crime against him that he was defending himself?
Depending on the relevant jurisdiction, even if it was a woman on a man, it would technically qualify as sodomy.
Well, I'll tell you.
And by the way, if I recall, oral copulation, whatever, falls under the sodomy laws.
That's what I just said.
Yes.
In Minnesota, he's likely effed. I'll tell you that. In Minnesota, he's almost certainly effed. And I mean that both ways.
Well, the interesting question is, do you think his defense of heat of passion, do you think, because that's really what we're talking about, was there a mitigate, would reasonable person in his position, because if we're talking about a subjective state of mind too, we're talking about somebody is Christian, all this other stuff. Would someone in his position react in such a certain way, just like seeing your spouse in bed with someone else? Would that be reasonable to say he did this, so this is mitigating circumstance?
I wouldn't react that way with my spouse was in bed though. So it depends on what's a reasonable person. That's a hard standard.
But well, generally for heat of passion, it's that example of you seeing your spouse in bed with someone else and killing your spouse.
Understand.
So that's what I'm saying. In this instance, you have to kind of say, well, does this rise to that particular level? Would this anger a heterosexual person in that way so much where if you had a gun, you could do something like this and that be enough to say this is manslaughter because of anger?
It would some.
What the only thing that I think hurts it is the fact that if it turns out to be true, he took money off of this person afterwards too. So there's a robbery component.
It's felony murder. He's going down for felony murder.
He's going down for felony murder.
He's not a murder charge.
That's true.
It's just. But I think just the manslaughter issue. I think this is interesting.
If he didn't take the people, don't take money off of the people you want alive.
Fair enough, but I could see somebody enraged. Hold on, I could see somebody enraged continuing on. I mean, if they're already in a psychotic mode to where they're firing multiple, emptying weapons, doing whatever, then just grabbing.
I don't think heat of passion is a defense to robbery, though.
Wait, hold on.
I'm just struggling with inappropriate jokes running through my head. So I'm just remaining silent.
You were the one who wanted to keep it inside the box.
Very subtle joke there, Kurt.
Oh wait, that was good.
See, Kirk is in because that's subtle. My jokes aren't.
I gotta tell you right now, the trans community has recently been making this push that if you refuse to engage in intercourse with a trans person, that makes you transphobic. And in a similar vein, I would tell you, any one of you who refuses to send me $50 is anti-Semitic. So.
By the way, the community considers misgendering to be a hate crime, so I don't want to go into that.
Well, in Canada, you would, I mean, the way that things work in Canada with self-ID laws, I feel like, you know, you would probably get away with that argument more easily.
Well, but in Canada, he'd be locked up for a hate crime, probably.
Definitely.
In my opinion.
Definitely.
I mean, it'll be over. There'll be no defense on the other side. But
so, is this a hate crime?
The heat of passion argument, I find that one hard because there are people, many who in that scenario, absolutely, it would be on the same, actually a higher level than catching their spouse, because they would feel like they were assaulted. You know, it's up because they can never take it back. And again, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that there are those who it would affect them psychologically so deeply that I can see them going way overboard.
I think he was assaulted. I think that the manslaughter argument is very strong for a case like this, especially because a crime was committed against his person by deception.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you right now. I know if I was sitting on that jury, I'd be looking to for any loophole under the law to because I'll tell you right now. You know, I'll tell you, if I can't imagine a scenario where I would ever kill another civilian.
Exactly.
I'm simply saying that
you're a better.
It's very
person
relatable.
Like
It's a very relatable thing because you feel he probably felt violated, like the same way a woman
felt violated.
Yeah, the same way same way if a woman had been SA'd, I'm sure he felt SA'd.
Or let's just talk about it like a woman voluntarily sleeps with a man and he does not wear a condom. That's stealthing under California law.
I have a question. Let's say that the last bit didn't happen. Let's stop before that point.
Okay.
To where now we just leave they split up, and if he didn't do the crime, the follow-up crime, let's say he just reported what happened, would that person not be guilty of a sexual assault or could be charged with an assault? I'm saying ignore the unaliving part. Up until that point, where are we? What's going on?
Yeah, I would say it would be a essay, I guess. I was trying to think of the right term to use for YouTube.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, I know.
Unlawful touching.
Yes, unlawful touching. It would be unlawful touching of certain areas of the body, definitely, because it is fraud in the inducement, but it is also fraud in fact, in my opinion. But either way, I think it is. So what state is this again? Is this New Jersey?
Minnesota.
Oh, Minnesota.
This is Minnesota.
State of
but
craziness.
There's a part of the story I think I should have mentioned earlier, which I feel bad.
It changes the whole thing. Let's do this.
Yes, and it does change the whole thing. So this was a prostitute, and he paid her for this act, and the robbery.
So there's a contract.
Oh my God! Hold on. So the robbery. Hold on. I haven't even finished. The robbery was him taking his money back after.
That's a little different.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Damn it.
So it wasn't robbery. It was merely. This is the O.J. Simpson defense.
A refund.
I wasn't robbing the guy. I was simply taking my own property back. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Great.
I was a breach of contract claim.
But this is why these videos do so well, because it always throws that extra layer to it. Like, oh my God, this now. Oh my God.
Can I ask a really quick question about felony murder? You guys brought up the whole felony murder argument. If you unalive somebody and then you commit a felony afterwards, and it's technically manslaughter, but the felonies, I mean, doesn't it have to be that the murder occurred in the commission of a felony in order for it to be felony murder? If it happens the other way around.
Well, they probably would qualify that the purpose in committing the murder was to get his money back. I'm sure that's how the DA would probably frame it.
Yeah.
That would be the way that you would. I just want to know how you frame it.
He committed the murder.
They probably would.
Okay, yeah.
They probably would frame it that way. Although I have to ask. If it's that amount of money, usually small levels of money are not felony; it's a misdemeanor. So it couldn't. I would think it couldn't qualify as a felony murder unless the robbery is worse. But like if you're mugged, usually that would not be classified as for like $50. Usually that would not be qualified as a felony under the law. I
Yes.
mean, in many places.
Any theft that occurs with an arm when the person is armed automatically elevates it to a felony.
If he's was he armed?
Well,
Was he
armed robbery is
that's how he was
robbery.
able to unalive her. So yes, he was armed.
No,
at
no, no.
time.
The other. Well, okay, yeah, you're
The
right.
person who
Also, in
unalived
states
her
that
was armed. Yeah.
Also,
at
in
the
states
time.
that distinguish between like first degree murder and second degree murder, one of the classic ways to elevate it is for murder with special circumstances, for like death penalty. And I know in New York it used to be the case, and I assume it's still in the books. I know the death penalty has been rendered unconstitutional, but it's still murder one if you commit a robbery in the course of committing a murder. So that would bump it up in New York law from murder 2 to murder 1. So,
and let's not also forget there's no merger rule in Minnesota,
That's
meaning
true,
that
too.
even an assault could lead to a felony murder conviction, i.e. Derek Chauvin. So what I mean by that is all murders are assaults. But in Minnesota, they
Presumably.
say if you commit a felony assault and that person happens to die from that assault, it's automatically first degree murder.
It's the stupidest thing in the world.
Well, Georgia also has no merger rule either.
Georgia's also stupid.
So yes, so even though we're arguing about robbery, even if they can just prove that without the murder that this was an assault, which clearly it was, and the person died from that assault, you still have felony murder on the table.
Right. Right.
Wow.
No, the reason it's so stupid, and this came up frequently in the Derek Chauvin context, is because we raise manslaughter. In case you want to know what felony murder is, which if you follow the Derek Chauvin trial, you might recall what it is. But felony murder is basically you're in the act of committing a felony, and during the course of committing that felony, you accidentally end up unaliving someone. So we say basically the philosophy on the underpin. So we say instead of it being deemed a lower level homicide I think homicide is okay, right?
Joe, I just got one correction.
Yeah.
You don't have to kill the person. Even if the police kill your accomplice, you will be charged with murder under the felony murder rule.
The point being, if someone dies if someone passes on in a violent way during the course of you committing that felony, the law of felony murder is we're not going to give you that lower level punishment of it being a manslaughter, but because you created this set of circumstances that led to that accident happening, we're going to raise up that accidental passing on into being intentional. So we'll call it'll be classified instead as man 1 or man 2. We're going to raise that up to being classified as if it's an actual intentional murder. We'll pass that intent to commit the crime into an intent into actually unaliving that person. So it's so it raises up the bar as to what level punishment you're ripe to. The reason that people get so many attorneys, most of this panel likely gets so outraged by a state like Minnesota. So a state like Minnesota says if you punch someone intentionally and that person ends up dying, so we're going to end up saying we're going to take your intent of having an assault, which is actually the punch, and we're going to raise that up that now you create a dangerous situation. So now you didn't mean to actually, commit murder. We're going to pretend as if you did, and the predicate felony is the assault, which is it's preposterous because anytime someone dies, there's almost invariably there's going to be some sort of intent to actually do some level of harm. Normally, the concept of felony murder is we don't want you creating dangerous situations like having a bank robbery. That's a classic example. We don't want you creating some sort of circumstance, and we're going to punish you for creating that circumstance by basically raising the level of punishment that you can be liable for. But in the context of, let's say, a bar fight now, so all of a sudden, well, you're in a bar fight, so you intended to punch the guy, so we're going to consider that the felony and then raise that to murder. It makes no sense philosophically if you understand why we have felony murder and raise it up to count that as the predicate felony.
But Joe, doesn't that just go to the eggshell skull rule?
No, and I understand what you're saying
because that's the way it was. I mean, I can't argue to it legally, but I did take an undergrad law class that was taught to me in California. It's like that,
right? Right. So what you're basically an eggshell. I'll let you clarify the eggshell skull for the audience. Yeah.
The premise of the eggshell skull rule essentially is that, if you do harm to a person and that person happens to be in a delicate condition, Let's say that you hit somebody and you punch them in the head. It turns out that their skull is as thin as an eggshell, and it cracks, and they get a brain bleed and they die. You are responsible for the harm that you cause, no matter how the precarious state of the person is your responsibility. You have to assume responsibility.
You take your victim as you find him, and just because
exactly,
most people would not have died, just because most people would not have actually had that impact, you can't say, well, I didn't expect him to die. You have to basically, you don't get the benefit of the fact that you don't have knowledge of his personal issues that led to the result being as tragic as it was.
But regardless of how fragile the person is, your intention was still not to unalive them, and the fact that they were in fact unalived shouldn't then be elevated to
unless
the felony
murder, in which case we don't care.
Well, yeah, that's the whole point we're talking here.
Right, but the reason I was saying it doesn't matter is because normally when we're talking about an eggshell, first of all, that's in a civil situation where we basically say,
well, that's true.
It's not a criminal situation.
We're not talking criminal. You're right.
Right. No, and it's an important distinction because we don't, because you have to have the mens rea. In a normally when we're going to charge someone, that's exactly what the point of the difference is between manslaughter, accidental death versus a murder charge. An intentional death is you have to have that mens rea, that intent to actually cause the person's passing.
Let's use all of this and shift. Somebody recommended in the chat, and this may be on point here. It's another case, the Mendez case, about a cop dying of a heart attack while he's being taken into custody or something. I think, Jeff, you were going to talk about it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Is this kind of tied in with what we're discussing right now?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, but there's so much more going on in this case. I mean, there's bad cases, and then there's just incredibly horrible cases. This starts out with just this kid, 18, he was either 17 or he had just turned 18. He's talking to his mother on the phone in front of the motel where he's staying. People get hung up on the fact he was an illegal immigrant, which has zero to do with the story. He was in the federal custody for several months. Then he was released to the care of a distant relative that was in the States, pending the resolution of his immigration, his status. So he was had every single right that you, me, Kurt, everybody else has to be on the street at the time he was on the street. So that's not in question, has nothing to do with it. But he's a day laborer there in Florida. He's sitting there talking to his mother on the phone. She lives in Guatemala, where he's from. And a cop rolls up. And that's where the stories diverge. The police reports are surprisingly a little different than what the camera shows and what the kid's side of the story is, as far as he's able to articulate it. Because he's sitting there, the cop says, well, he tried to flee, and I approached it. The first thing the cop does is get out of his car and yells, stop. And the kid wasn't even moving. And then he's asking, well, where are you staying? Where are you staying? And all the kid can say is eating, pointing over to where he's staying. And it ends up just in a matter of seconds. The cop, so it was an illegal Terry stop as far as I'm concerned, straight from the get-go. The cop had zero reason to talk to him beyond, hey, what are you doing here? Eating. That should, if anything, that should have been the end of it. Then he grabs the kid's arm and says, don't resist, don't try to flee, don't run away, and don't pull on my arm, something to that effect. And then he starts to try to pat the kid down, which again, he has absolutely zero authority as far as I'm concerned to pat this kid down, because he didn't meet any of the requirements of a reasonable and articulable belief that the kid was armed and dangerous at the time he tried to conduct an over-the-clothing search. And within seconds, they're on the ground. Then sooner or later, 2 or 3 other cops show up, and the kid is tased 6 or 7 times in 2 minutes. And he's screaming, family, 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 sorry, 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 no. And he's trying to push the taser away from him. They're saying he was trying to take the taser from the cops and attack them with it. There was something about a knife that just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And it takes about 13 minutes or so. I guess about 8 minutes to get the situation back under control again. The first cop that made the stop, walks back to the car. He's talking to some people. The kid is in handcuffs. He's in the back of a car. And I think it was about, I want to say 4 minutes off the top of my head, between 4 and 6 minutes later, cop drops dead. They charged the kid with first-degree murder of felony murder of a law enforcement officer.
Because he had a heart attack, correct?
Yeah, the officer had a heart attack, and the kid was resisting.
Well,
to be fair,
they downgraded it to aggravated manslaughter because they couldn't have made the felony murder stick. But the police officers, it went well beyond a heart attack. He was 52 years old. He was recovering apparently from bronchitis. He had heart arrhythmia. He had hardening of the arteries. He had blocked arteries. There was something else that was wrong with him too. I think that was it. And then because when he first hit the ground, because they thought that he might have been somehow contacted with fentanyl and had a fentanyl overdose, they blasted him with 2 doses of Narcan, and that's when he stopped breathing.
Yeah,
and
I'll tell you this much. I agree with you that it seems like it's a Terry violation. When you watch that video, it does. You can understand why the cops would basically be sitting there thinking he was resisting and not just trying to stop himself from being hurt. You can I was like, you keep seeing, when I was watching all the time, I was like thinking to myself, just stop resisting for the
He's being
crying out loud.
tased 6 times though.
Right. No, and there's also some context that I think you might have left out, which is important from the kid's perspective, which apparently is, what country was he from?
He's from Guatemala. He speaks neither Spanish nor English. He speaks a very obscure
he had
Mayan
no understanding
dialect.
and also apparently, like, where he's from, like, it's common for people to basically to come up, even like police authorities just come up and just like kidnap and harm people. That's what
they have no police. That was part of it. He was found incompetent because not for any mental illness reasons, but just for intellectually incompetent. So they're going to train him apparently to understand the legal system. But they have no police officers. They have no cops in his culture. They have like tribal elders. The only interaction he has with police is the Guatemalan police that are trying to commit genocide on his particular group of people.
He wandered out of the mountains, just had no idea what society really was.
And that's a really important fact.
5'4", 115 pounds.
Right, and that's a really important fact from my perspective, as far as what culpability you can attach to this kid, because essentially part of the reason that we give deference to police is there's sort of a societal understanding that especially if it's not a plainclothes police officer, but someone, there's a difference between, let's say, someone is attacked by a plainclothes police officer versus someone who's clearly in uniform, that there's a societal expectation that you're going to respect the uniform. And over here, he had no basis to know of that societal expectation given his background. So really, we need to look at it as an unidentified. If they had been 5 unidentified police officers, what would be a normal, reasonable person's reaction in this situation, given his mindset? And I think that's a fairer way to start digesting as to what expectations we should have of this kid. That pretend that they're all plainclothes and never identify themselves, and they just come over and start doing this to him. What would be a normal, reasonable reaction? And I think that, given in that context, I think you can understand. You can understand him doing what he's doing. There's no way he should be charged. At the same time, you also have to look at the police officer's perspective with respect to how they're acting and start figuring out what violations they committed against him. And I still think that there's a Terry violation here. I still think that.
At least
I think if you look, again, from what Legal Vices is just laid out, number one, there's some legal things that I think we have to kind of unwrap. Number one, if we're saying there's no justification for the Terry stop, that means obviously there's no probable cause for an arrest. Mm-hmm. And then we got to talk about what jurisdiction this is. And the reason why that's important is because
Florida.
All right. So since we're in Florida, there's there is no such thing as resisting detainment. You can only resist arrest. But now to resist arrest, you have to have probable cause to make an arrest. Some states observe, like in New York, where even if the cops arrest you false arrest, you can't resist a false arrest. But some states, like Colorado and some other states, allow you to resist a false arrest because they say you can't resist detainment. So Florida is one of those states where you cannot resist, where you can resist detainment. The cops can't detain you for any unless they have probable cause. Then the whole analysis goes out the window because if there's no false arrest, which seems like what this is all based on, then everything else after that doesn't make any sense. So I believe Florida is one of those states where you can only resist arrest. You cannot resist you can resist detainment. So
okay, and it's funny
Where's
that New
Gosney
York
when we
and
need him?
Texas. Well, yeah, it's funny that Texas and New York apparently have the same law that you can't resist arrest or detainment from the police, which I find is funny that New York and Texas are on the same page.
But I mean, all of this, you still have to prove with the aggravated manslaughter of a law enforcement officer charge that this kid reasonably knew or should have known that his actions in trying not to be tased would lead to the death of the police officer, which I think is just a bunch of horseshit.
But that's the subjective test versus the objective test, right? Are we talking subjectively putting somebody in his position, or are we talking about objectively with a reasonable person, not him, but a reasonable fictitious person believe that?
Anybody believe that?
Did he actually resist? Because what I didn't understand from the way that you told the story, Jeff, if you might be able to clarify, you didn't really talk about the actions of the kid. Did he actually engage
he
in
laid there
resisting?
screaming, family, no, sorry, for about 90% of it. The other 10%, he was trying to stand up.
He did pull away from the officer when the officer first laid hands on him and was patting him down. He did pull away from the officer. Then the officer wrestled him down to the ground. At one point, when Joe was talking about, at some point you just stop resisting, they had him in a position where he was on his hands and knees, and he had two large officers on his back tasing him. If he would have just put his hands back, he would have face planted in the dirt in a weird, awkward position. They didn't make it easy for him to comply. So that too was going on.
Well, the interesting thing also is there was one point where he does manage to actually stand up. This 5'4", 115 pound, 17-year-old kid stands up, and he stops and stands there. He was doing nothing aggressive, nothing to resist. He just stood up. He got free, and he just stood there. And then the other cop grabbed him and threw him down on the ground again.
Oh, one other thing too. So apparently he's sending money, cash back home to his family. He has a bunch of cash in his pocket. And so when the officers start reaching for it, that's when he gets nervous because he doesn't want that money taken, presumably, right? And if he knew anything about civil asset forfeiture, he'd be smart not to let the cops get their hands on it. So,
and that's an interesting thing too, though, because people are saying, well, he shouldn't. The cop had I don't believe the cop had the right to search him because, again, there was no reasonable, articulable threat or belief that he was armed and dangerous at the time he tried to do this pat down. Plus, if you stop the video, you can see that his hand is not on the cop's hand. The cop's hand is on his. He's protecting his pocket, and the cop has his hand on top of his.
Yeah, but you can tell it's not a firearm or anything. It's a wad of cash. Everyone knows what a wad of cash feels like in your pocket. And the officer, I will say too, if you watch the body cam, the officer came in hot. It wasn't like it was like escalated gradually. The officer got out of his car, turned his camera on, walked up, stop right there. Where are you going? What are you doing? And
this whole thing could have ended with, hey, it was 9 p.m. on a May evening or late May. He was just eating his meal, talking to his mother on the phone right next to the hotel where he was staying. All the cops got to do is come up and say, hey, where are you staying? What are you doing out here? Eating. I am staying over there. All right, have a nice day.
But he didn't know English, right? So even though all of that may have been confusing, because this reminds me of the Colorado deaf man case where the guy was deaf and the cops were and they arrested him and beat him up, and they're like, what happened? I couldn't hear. So sometimes, unfortunately, this thing happens. But I think the perp here, if we want to call him that, I think he has a really solid defense, right? If what you're saying is true, all of those, that tackling and all that stuff, that essentially is the police assaulting him if they didn't have the legal right to do it. Just because you see someone and they're resisting a pat down, if they're not technically not under arrest and just you're trying to detain them, then they can say, no, I don't want you to touch me unless I'm under arrest.
Yeah, they have the authority to do what they have to do. We grant police that authority, provided that they comply with due process. So one can make the point, as his attorneys could arguably make the point, that they were acting without any sort of authority. So why should we look at them because of the due process violations? So why should we give them any latitude at all, different than if it was 5 people mugging him?
Yeah, exactly. That's well, and the thing that makes the legal proceedings that much worse for this guy is this happened. I don't know how long he's been locked up, but it's been quite a while. He's not out on bond, and there's a competency issue, and so they can't address like a motion to dismiss or exclude all this evidence or anything like that until he's first found competent, which is taking forever. In the meantime, he's just sitting there locked up, and which I don't think is right either. So a lot of problems with this case.
The crazy part about this is the same argument they use against the Chauvin cops. They had the authority to do stuff, but soon as they started doing it, they didn't have any authority to do it. And now it went from a lawful arrest to an assault. And that's the same thing here. If the police don't have the authority to put their hands on you, it's an assault.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is the original, the impetus for the approaching the kid was trespassing. Well, guess what they didn't charge him with?
Yeah, because they found his hotel key in his pocket.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, so let's go and close out. Last story, Kurt. You've survived YouTube and Disney and the assault. So help us understand why Steamboat Willie is such a problem for you.
Yeah, so I did a live stream where I was going to talk about Steamboat Willie and talk about what is or is not within copyright, because Disney has taken a position about more modern versions of Mickey not being in public domain, but I don't think that's right. And I was going to do a nice little legal analysis, going to talk about Elred versus Ashcroft, which extended out the copyright term, or at least recognized the ability of Congress to extend out the term. So I was doing a live stream, and they took down my stream. They deleted it for repeated copyright violations of Steamboat Willie. And it's like, so you've committed a community guidelines violation, and they gave me a community guidelines warning. So I was like, well, this is some BS, and I appealed it, and of course they denied it because, they don't actually read anything. And so then I complained on Twitter for a while. I'm like, yeah, you got to take a closer look at this. But I tried it again like 3 days later, and it was the same problem with it flagged. So the issue is that the audio for it is still in the Content ID system, and Disney has not removed it. And I went to YouTube and I'm like, you really got to take this out, Content ID. And they're like, no, we're not going to do any of those things because that's up to Disney to fix, and we don't really care about that. So no. So yeah, so you can't apparently live stream Steamboat Willie because they're still trying to claim copyright on it through the Content ID.
I tried to stream a movie once just as a test thing, and I went as far back as I could to find like one of the first talkies that's completely out of the copyright claim, and just streamed it on YouTube as a test, and they struck it. And it was like from 1920 something. I don't even know what it was. And it's ridiculous the way YouTube is hitting there. But I have a question for you, Kurt, if you didn't look into this yet, or if you have. So Mickey Mouse as a cartoon entity in Steamboat Willie is apparently copyright free now. It's in the public domain. But every time you draw a Mickey Mouse, shouldn't that also be in the public domain now? I mean, because there could be different iterations of the same character. Think of King Kong that's in the public domain.
So it gets complicated, as you would expect. And there's been a lot of work on this already done with respect to Sherlock Holmes, because his work came out of copyright, but not all of it. And so what is the nature of Sherlock Holmes? What is Sherlock Holmes, and what parts of his character are or are not within the public domain at various points becomes very interesting linguistically, legally tricky as you try to evolve on this. But
pretty sure Steamboat Willie and Mickey Mouse are two distinct entities, though, in terms of the way that the copyright is
They kind of are
but
two,
it really,
but they're
really
shouldn't
not.
be because it's Steamboat
Yeah.
Willie featuring Mickey Mouse. That's the name of the movie.
Yeah. So and if you this is going to be part
Well,
of
no,
my
it was
analysis.
Mortimer Mouse. No.
No, it was Mickey.
No.
If you
It
go
was
to
Mickey. Okay, never mind
if you go
then.
to like the movie sized, things that you go when you go to the movie theater, what do you call it? Poster?
Yeah.
So to advertise it, like you go to the posters, it's basically Mickey Mouse as you'd recognize him today. And there's no copyright date on it, which in 1929 was required. So, so that's all in the public domain too, because they never copyrighted it in the first place for lack of notice.
Where does the crossover with respect to trademark come in? Because they've turned Mickey Mouse into the trademark. It's not simply just a character that they created, but it actually has become part of their branding. Is Mickey himself?
Yeah, so they put a short or a little bit of a clip from Steamboat Willie with the music, and they've been putting it in their animated title cards for a little while now to try to gain some trademark recognition, and have filed for an official trademark with the U.S. Patent Office, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I think they can do that. The trademark interest is totally separate from the copyright interest. So trademark only pops up when you're trying to use it in trade. So as long as I'm not trying to sell something, or more to the point, as long as I'm not trying to pretend it's from Disney, that's the real critical thing. So as long as it's not pretending to be from Disney, I'm fine.
Okay, so question on that, Kurt, because my partner Mark Robert worked with National Lampoon, and National Lampoon, one of the only cases they only lost a couple, was they did a spread of Mickey Mouse with like a giant cleavage or skiing off of it or something. Technically, if Steamboat Willie had the cleavage and somebody's skiing off of it and they're selling a magazine, how would that work? Because they are making money off of that image.
So they created anime? Really?
So your hypothetical is that Disney's original creation looks the same as the mad parody of it, at which point it's no longer a parody.
Okay, well, that was my question. So, but if it's out of copyright, that's why I'm asking you. I am confused about that when you said it. Is it profiting or not profiting or whatever?
Well, at this point, no, it doesn't. As the copyright, as to copyright, there's no.
But, well, the trademark.
I can make all the money. Yeah. The trademark. Yeah, I can't use it in trade. I can't. A trademark by its nature is a source identifier. That's what trademarks are. They are meant to inform the consumer as to what the origin of the product is. So as long as I'm not using it in that sense, there's no trademark infringement. So as long as there's no confusion about origin, it's fine.
So if you make a Mickey Mouse or a Steamboat, whatever, that iteration horror movie where he's stabbing or doing whatever, then you're fine.
Yeah, no problem.
Now, was there any pushback on this with Winnie the Pooh? Because I remember just this past Halloween, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey came out, and it fell out of copyright, and so there's been a bunch of stuff going on with that.
Yes.
Do you know of anything going on with Winnie the Pooh?
No. And there's going to be a sequel now because Tigger just came out of copyright. So now there's going to be a follow-up with Tigger.
I was
who's now out of
wondering
copyright too.
I was wondering why Pooh's friends weren't in that movie. Except
they
for
hadn't been
Piglet.
invented yet.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I see. Poor Pooh had no friends for a while, but now it's been rectified. All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and to a close with Dave. What do you have coming up?
So later on today, at 5:30, I think 5:30 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to do an update on the Crumbly case. We're going to talk about some last-minute motions that have been filed, as well as where we stand with the streaming of it. As I said earlier, I have been denied my cameras despite all of my best efforts in communication with the court for a while. So we're going to talk about that and what we plan on having coming up with Crumley. That's James and Jennifer Crumley, the parents of the Oxford school shooter. And so that's my next stream coming up later today.
Awesome. Jeff, besides crashing finally, whatever time it is there, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning? What do you have coming up? And your mute button's on.
Yeah, 4 in the morning. Okay, yeah. In a few hours, we're going to be catching up on Becky Hill, her situation. Monday, we've got the Penley lifeboat disaster. Tuesday, we're going to be doing some deep diving into the incredible case of the Bachelor contestant, Clayton. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. His last name has just slipped my Clayton Eckert. Clayton Eckert and the woman we're calling Jane Doe, who accused him of getting her pregnant with twins from oral copulation somehow. We're going to be looking more into that case. And then Wednesday, I will be having Gregory Anderson, Maya Kowalski's lawyer, on for a couple of hours.
You know, a glass and a turkey baster. That's what happened there.
I guess so. So Chandler.
She was never pregnant. Spoiler alert! It never happened. And this is guy number 3. She's accused of that.
Mm-hmm.
Chandler, what do you have coming up?
Well, tomorrow I'm going to be diving further into my brand new Wicked Women series. Last week, we did our very first episode on female predators, where we talked about Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm going to be talking about the prevalence of predation committed by females and the different kinds of female perpetrators that there are. It'll just be me tomorrow. But last week, I was on with Allison Tiemann of Honey Badger Radio. Sorry, Allison Tiemann. And so, yeah, that's going to be my weekly thing. I've been doing it. I'm supposed to do it next week on Friday with Danny On. We're going to be talking about Lori Vallow, Ruby Frankie, and women who harm their children. I'm also going to be on Nina Infinity's channel next week. Stick around for that. Look forward to that. That'll be really fun. I love Nina. Nina's awesome. And yeah, brand new series, Wicked Women. Check it out.
All right, Kurt, what do you have coming up?
Well, I'm on a continuing quest to try to get underlying source documents for the Superman guy in Nevada with Las Vegas, because I'd really love to review a probable cause affidavit or an arrest report. The Metropolitan Police have denied me access on the basis it's an ongoing investigation. But I've seen quotes in the news, right? So the news media, I guess the approved news media, are quoting from the arrest report and saying this is what the arrest report says, but I can't get a copy. Totally lame. I'm currently also on a quest to try to get it from the court itself, but they don't seem like they're going to give it to me. It's like you have to go pay for it and pick it up in person, which is a little inconvenient. So I don't know how this is all going, but we're having trouble. But hopefully you're going to do that soon, because I'd like to talk about the charges and what evidence there is, and that would be in the arrest report. That'd be great. And I'm thinking about covering the Treehouse murder trial out of Florida. I'm a day behind on it. But it's really interesting. I heard the opening statements, and the defendant is representing himself pro se in his criminal trial, and he gave a pretty good opening statement. It's like, if he can really say what he says, if he can really produce that evidence, it's like, okay, he might have it. And he gave a coherent opening. So I was like, okay, this might be worthy of covering. Maybe a pro se will win one. We'll see.
He stumbles on a couple of questions, but he's got really good points he's been making so far. I've been watching a little.
Yeah, so I'm a day behind. So I was thinking about streaming yesterday's stream now and seeing what it looks like and go from there.
All right, before I go to Joe, hopefully everybody sees the subtle message that I have on the screen covering Joe. But if you like this kind of stream, again, you like these panels, I'm very blessed to have such great people show up and share their opinions, etc. Please consider subscribing. Share this out. It is Laid Back Law now. This is the channel. You'll have these panels or clips from these panels, so you know exactly what you're getting. And if 1,141 of you are still here at the end of the show watching, this might be something for you to consider subscribing to. It helps out a ton. And in the tradition of the channel, we always try to let Joe speak last, because he has things to say. Some would say wisdom, but again, he has things to say. And Joe, what do you have going on, and what wisdom do you have to depart? Impart, or whatever.
Hi, my name is Joe Neerman, also known as Good Logic. I have channels on YouTube and on Rumble. You can follow me on Twitter at The Following Pro. And the most important place you can find me is on Locals. You might say, what's Locals? I don't even know what Locals is. Locals is like this whole alternate universe type of thing where apparently it feels like I have my own little website, but it's not. And it's called goodlogic.locals.com. That's goodlogic.locals.com. Make sure you go there. Like now. Don't wait for the no, I mean like right now. Right. Goodlogic.locals.com. And yeah, as far as final thoughts, I'm just going to tell you now, I'm to think that with respect to Disney as an entity, we have to look at them not as some force of good. They are a force